We are in class number 20. Oh, this went far longer than I thought it would be, but we were in the book of Daniel. That's really what the problem has been. It's been a journey, but I hope we've learned something, at least historically, or something, just about what goes on in the heavenlies when we're talking about kingdoms and nations and the rise and fall of nations. As I said, I think before, that the national was the Encyclopedia Britannica. It made that statement, the historian, that said you can measure the rise and fall of nations on the manner in which they treat Israel, and it's true. And the reason we said that is because God picked that nation to step them up and elevate them in the world in which we live, so that they would be an example of what it is to covenant to and serve the living God. They had their good days and their bad days, and God warned them that their bad days during those periods of time, He wouldn't abandon them or forget them, but they wouldn't have that place of favor. And so as we went through the book of Daniel here, because we're studying the Antichrist, we get a synopsis of and a vision of world history, and it's incredible what went on. We're coming to chapter 11. Chapter 11 of the book of Daniel has 144 prophecies in it. It's an incredibly accurate piece of historical foresight. And I love history, but this would really put your head in a swim because of the names and the different people. But it all gathers around this bunch of people here. I told you we'd start into this first thing today to get moving on, if it will move on. See what's happened here. That doesn't work, it'll work. Oh. Quite interesting. Oh, maybe it's this. Yeah, Marty broke it, obviously. Anyway, but we talked about the different kingdoms that came through. We had the Babylonian, the Medo-Persian, we had the Grecian, then we'll have the Roman, then we'll have the revised Roman, and then we'll have the Antichrist and the Millennial Kingdom. And we went through the different visions that Daniel had, whether it be under Nebuchadnezzar or later on himself on 2 occasions. He got these visions of these creatures, and then he got these visions of these 2 animals, a ram and a goat. And we went through it all, looking back in hindsight. And we discovered that, it broke down to these 4 generals that Alexander the Great left behind. And they broke the then kingdom that Alexander had, they broke it into 4 groups, 4 different generals: Calisander, Lysimus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. And these 4 guys took over the remainder of Alexander the Great's kingdom, and it's around that the rest of the book of Daniel revolves, around these 4, particularly these 2, the Seleucus and Ptolemy. These 2 generals get into fighting with each other. And the whole of chapter 11 deals with these 2 individuals and what goes on with them. And from verse 2 right through to verse 35. There's a lot of history in these first few verses. But these 2 guys start to fight with each other, and then they make peace with each other, and then they die and their kids take it up, and then the kids get upset with the other kids, and then they stop. But what you don't realize is in the middle of these battles that go on is a little country called Israel. And they get trampled on. The north and the south and the north and the south and the north. Later on, when we get into verses 35 through the end of chapter 11, when the Antichrist starts to prophesy about the Antichrist, the battles aren't just going to be from the north and the south, but it's going to be from the east and the west. And so we're going to have battles running across this little land called Israel. And they're going to be fighting from the north, south, east, and west. And that little country is going to get trodden on intentionally with the desire to destroy them completely. And what we'll see in the natural is all of these battles that go on, but the spiritual intent is to destroy the nation of Israel. And so these two kings, one of them is going to get called and referenced as the king of the north, and the other one's going to get referenced as the king of the south. And it's talking about these two, Seleucus and Ptolemy. And one is over Egypt and the other is over Syria or Assyria, that whole area. And so these two are going to get into it for generations, for several hundred years. Out of these battles between these two, one will prevail over the other, and then the other will prevail over them, and it'll go to and fro several times. We're not going to get into all that. We will take maybe the first 6 verses of chapter 11 or 7. And it's going to go to and fro, but the foresight of what's going to happen by Daniel is so incredibly accurate that people later on, when they read Daniel, said, in hindsight, they said, no, somebody after all of this wrote this, because you could not have known all of this prior to, it's just too detailed. But it was true. It was written before it. And it was very detailed, because only God knows the future. But these two guys are going to keep arguing to and fro. But out of this area, this yellow area where Seleucus comes, out of his loins is going to come a family, or part of his family, the Epiphanes family. And out of it, we're going to find out a couple of 100 years down the street, there's a guy going to come out of here called Antichrist Epiphanes. And Antichrist Epiphanes is like a type of the Antichrist. He's going to go against Israel with intent. And he goes to go down and fight Egypt, and the Romans are on the scene at that stage, and they're saying, if you fight with Rome, or if you fight with Egypt, you fight with us. And then in order to fill his coffers, he turns toward Israel, and he goes in and he plunders Israel and takes all of their wealth. Antichrist Epiphanes is a type of the Antichrist. He tries to destroy Israel. He plunders them, and he's the guy who goes in and he offers 1,000 pigs and 1,000 boys on the altar of the temple to try and defile it. He hates them that much, and he does what he does. And this is when the rebellion of the Maccabees, which you'll hear about, the Maccabees family rose up, priestly family rose up and led a rebellion. And so there was a fight went on for 3.5 years, and they eventually won. They prevailed. And Antichrist Epiphanes backed off and later died. And then the Romans came in, and Herod the Great and all of that took over, and they rebuilt the temple. And what we call the Christmas, that many of you have at that time, whether you realize it or not, in Israel they celebrate a thing called the Festival of Light. And what they'd done was, when the Maccabees prevailed and the temple was rededicated, they cleaned the whole thing out, but they brought light back into the temple to reintroduce, so to speak, light coming back into darkness. And it happens around the December the 25th, and it's where we get our Christmas, putting the lights on the tree as symbolic of light coming into a world full of darkness, the birth of Jesus. We celebrate it as Christians, but they celebrate the Festival of Light, is what they do in the Jewish calendar, and that's what that was. But this Antichrist Epiphanes endeavored to destroy Israel, and he's a type of the Antichrist. The Antichrist himself, he will again try to do the same, and Jesus will have to come back the second advent and destroy him. So we have this type of Antichrist trying to destroy the first advent, and then we're going to have the real Antichrist trying to destroy the outcome of a second advent. And that's the way it works. So here's the thing about prophecy. We said, it's made known prior to its fulfillment, beyond all human foreknowledge. It contains specific details. The time elapsed between the publication and the fulfillment of it. So you don't predict it today and it happens tomorrow. There's time period. It excludes the profit or the interest of any parties trying to fulfill it. And it's a clear and detailed fulfillment in every particular. That's what prophecy is. The thing about prophecy is only God can give it. We have all sorts of people, with tea leaves and Torah cards and, astrologies and all sorts of stuff, trying to tell you and predict tomorrow and next week and next year and who you're going to run into this month and so on and so forth. If you're Capricorn or Sagittarius or you're Cancer or, rubbish. It's all, you can't do it. It just doesn't. Nobody can predict the future. Only God. He's not subject to time, and he can tell the future. So God has the ability to talk about beforehand and afterward. Now I put that in there because a lot of people forget that when Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, Moses wasn't there in the book of Genesis. He wasn't there in the garden. How could Moses have been in the Garden of Eden? How could Moses have understood all of that prior to the flood, really? Because he wasn't a part of it. But God was able to, by the Spirit of God, when he got a hold of Moses, as Moses penned the first 5 books of the Bible or the Torah, as he penned it, he was now looking back on what happened. He could never have known. No man could have known what went on in the garden and Satan and what God said and whatever. And so this afterward, this prophecy was afterward. When Moses wrote that, it was after the event, but yet he spoke into it. No man could have known it. And then, of course, prophecy is predictive as well as beforehand. So a lot of times when people say, prophecy tells you of things that didn't happen yet, it's partially true. Moses wrote of things that had already happened that nobody could have known of without divine revelation. So it's beforehand and afterward, and that's, again, unique to God. God used to mock the others, nations of the world, and say things like, let all the nations be gathered together, and let the people be assembled. Whom among you can declare this and show us things that are going to happen? And he mocked them. He says, let them bring forth their witnesses, that they may be justified, and let them come near and say, it is a truth. And then he goes on to talk about, I'm the one who tells you the future. Nobody else can. And so God would always challenge the gods of the other nations by being able to prophesy the future. Again, produce your cause, saith the Lord. Bring forth your strong reasons, saith the King of Jacob. Let them bring them forth and show us what shall happen. In other words, tell us in advance. It says, let them show the former things, what they shall be, that they may consider them and know the latter end from them, or declare us things for to come. They couldn't do it, and he knew that they couldn't, but God would always, through the prophets of Israel, would always challenge the nations round about and say, if you're ever so smart, come and tell us what's going to happen next week and the week after. They could never do it. And again, many, many times, who hath declared from ancient times, and who has told it from that time? Answer, nobody. Nobody could. The only person who could was God. Or again, he mocks them again and says, this is what the Lord says, Israel's King and Redeemer, the Lord Almighty. I am the first, I am the last. Apart from me there is no God. Who then is like me? Let him proclaim it, let him declare and lay out before me what has happened since I established my ancient people, and what is yet to come. Yes, let them foretell what will come. And the truth of the matter was, nobody could. So when you pick up these manuscripts and people say, well, it's just a nice book. It's not. It's an incredibly detailed synopsis, both of what has happened and what will happen by by prophecy, beforehand and afterward. And so when we get to chapter 11 here, this is really the synopsis of what we've studied over the last several months together. We talked about the different empires that existed, the Egyptian, the Assyrian, the Babylonian, the Medo-Persian, the Grecian, the Roman, the Revised Roman, and then the Millennial Kingdom. And we saw that. We talked about that. Then we saw it get broke down again into a little bit more detail, and we went to chapter 7, and we saw these different beasts that came up in chapter 7, and we saw these 10 toes, or the 10 crowns, and 3 were destroyed, and a little horn came up, and this guy spoke fierce things against God, and we saw the Ancient of Days, and this whole stuff that went on in chapter 7. Then we get a bit more detail in chapter 8. This is some 3 years later. He gets another vision of this, and we get these 2 creatures, the ram and the goat, and we know it's the Grecian Empire. And then we see the horn getting broken, these 4 horns coming up, and then out of that a little horn. And again, this little horn speaks fierce things against God and blasphemy against God, and it really troubles Daniel. And then we get into chapter 11. Chapter 11 now is going to go down to these, as you can see, it's breaking it down, it's narrowing it right down. In fact, it's narrowing it down to Seleucus, that individual, or Assyria is where it's narrowing it down. So the Antichrist is going to come out of where Seleucus is. That's where he's coming from. And that's what this whole series of visions are bringing us to. In chapter 11, we're going to get to these 4 generals. In one in particular is Seleucus. Out of Seleucus, and these battles that go on between Seleucus and Ptolemy, we're going to have the emergence of this Antiochus Epiphanes, this type of Antichrist that is going to go against with the endeavor to destroy Israel. And then it's going to skip halfway through the chapter, and it's going to talk directly about the Antichrist. So you won't see the flip. I'll show it to you as we go. This particular individual, let's go to chapter 11 if you would. Everybody with me so far? All right. So we covered a lot of ground, so it can sound confusing, but it's working again. Daniel chapter 11. As I said, we're going to skite over this. Really, we're not going to get into the details at the beginning of this because of just the historical aspect. If you're interested in history, it is something you could go back, and there's many books on this that you could read. I'll navigate the first several verses with you. In chapter 11, verse 1, it says, also I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, this is the Medo-Persian, even I stood and confirmed and to strengthen him. It says, and now will I. The I here is Gabriel, who's in chapter 10 showing him the vision, answering the prayer after the 21 days he came in to show him. So he says, and I will show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia. So it hadn't happened yet. He's under Darius right now, but there's going to be 3 others after him. They haven't existed yet. They haven't come yet. And the 3 he's talking about is Cambrys, Darius II, and Artaxerxes, which is going to come in later. So these other 3 kings are going to come in. But at this stage, Darius has just set up, and he says there's going to be 3 more kings in the Medo-Persian Empire still yet to come. So he says, behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia. The 4th shall be far richer than they all, and by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. So this last king, Antichrist, is going to become very, very wealthy, and in his pomp and splendor, he's going to go after Greece, which plays right into the hand of a young man called Alexander the Great. And instead of their own country fighting among themselves, he says, this upstart down here in the Medo-Persian Empire thinks he's the be-all and end-all of everything, and it's what stirs up Alexander the Great. And so this guy, in his great riches, he shall stir up against the realm of Greece. Verse 3, and a mighty king shall stand up, and that shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. Who is that king that's going to stand up against the Medo-Persians? Alexander. This is this great king. Then verse 4, and he shall stand up, and when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken, and shall be divided toward the four winds. What's he talking about? The four generals. His king stand up, but it'll be broken. He's going to die at 33 years of age. His kingdom then is going to be divided among the four generals of the heavens. And not in his posterity, in other words, it won't be to his kids, nor according to his dominion, which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up, even as the others besides those. And the king of the south, now the king of the south is Ptolemy. This is one of the generals who's going to take over Egypt and that North Africa area. So it says the king of the south, which is Egypt or Ptolemy, it says, shall be strong. And one of his princes, and he shall be strong above him, and have dominion, and his dominion shall be a great dominion. The word there, and one of his princes, another of the princes, which is Seleucia. So one of them's in the south, one of them's in. Seleucia will rise up, and he'll be greater than him, and he will have great dominion. So these two kingdoms, Ptolemy and Seleucus, one's in Assyria, the other's in Egypt, they're going to start rivaling each other. And they're going to start going to war against one another. And they're going to keep running up and down across the nation of Israel in order to do it. It says in verse 6, and in the end of years they shall join themselves together. There's going to be that much arguing and fighting among them. I won't get into that. I'll summarize a little bit. The king in the south and the king in the north, Seleucus and Ptolemy. They're going to become rivals to one another. The one in the north, Seleucus, is going to become very powerful. And at some stage, within his own family, one of his kids are going to rise up against him. And he's going to run and flee. But where do you think he's going to flee to? He's going to flee down to his fellow general down in Egypt, and he's going to have mercy on him and take him in. And when he does take him in and the thing sorts itself out in the south, in the north, eventually he's going to go back. When he goes back, he now knows what his enemy is like, and he's going to rise up and he's going to start fighting him again. So it just goes to and fro all the time, and eventually they make peace. So verse 6 says this, and in the end of the years they shall join themselves together, for the king's daughter of the south shall come up to the king in the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain her power of her arm, neither shall he stand, nor his arm, but she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times. It's really detailed. Let me just, I'm only going as far as this. And I get to the bottom line here. They're going to fight and argue that many times. There's going to be that many battles between them and their children, that eventually the king of the south sends his daughter up. Her name is Bernice. So he sends Bernice up to marry Seleucus' son. There's a problem though. Seleucus' son is already married. But in order to make the covenant between them, he gets rid of his wife, puts her aside, and he marries the daughter of the king of the south. Everybody thinks that's going to solve it. There's a problem. The ex-wife. So, the son wants his first wife back. So in order to get his first wife back, he kills Bernice and her son. And he takes his first wife back. When she comes back, she thinks, I can't trust this fella. So she kills him. And the rest is just a mess of fighting and arguing between two kingdoms because the other fella's daughter was killed. And then it's just so historically, it's just a hodgepodge of all sorts of stuff. But as you go through, and if you're interested, you'll see all of these different battles until it comes to verse 21. In verse 21, we get the rise of this guy called Antiochus Epiphanes, historically. This guy, Antiochus Epiphanes, is one of the sons of, or descendants of Seleucus, the Assyrian. And he's ruthless. All he's after is money. He doesn't care about anybody else. Nobody. Just money. And he starts, it says in verse 21, and in his estate he shall stand up the vile person, to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. Oh, this guy's a charmer. This guy's going to come in, flatter everybody, and when he has them all where he wants them, then he's going to jump, then he's going to pounce, then he's going to take over. And if you read all about this guy, and I'm going to go back on this next week when I'm talking about the character of the Antichrist, because this is a type of him. So we're going to see some of the characteristics of the Antichrist in this guy and the next guy. But what's going to happen is he's going to go down to fight Egypt he's going to go down south to fight the descendants of Ptolemy. And as he goes down to do it, the Roman army rise up against him and say, you're not to do that. We've got a covenant or a contract with Rome now, with Egypt. If you go after them, you go after us. So instead of doing that, he goes after Israel, and he plunders the place, and he steals everything out of it, takes all of their stuff, and that's where we have this battle. So right up until verse from 21 to 35 is all the exploits of this particular individual called Antiochus Epiphanes. All right?
They need to make a soap opera about this.
Pardon?
They need to make a soap opera about this. Sure.
It is a soap opera. It's a historical. The thing about it is, and I'm sorry for bogging down, because I hate when we get to this sort of stuff. It's so detailed as you read the things that historians, in hindsight, as they go the far side of it now when it's all over, look back and think, wow, you couldn't have said that. You couldn't have known that so-and-so's daughter was going to be, and he would kill, and then that would happen, and that the in-laws of them would write, because it's all in that. Nah, that's too detailed. There's too much family integration and animosity going on there for anyone to have been able to see that, except in hindsight. The thing about it was Daniel gave it all in foresight. And it boggles historians that so much detail could be given in one chapter about details over the next several hundred years as regard to two kingdoms, north and south. When we get to verse 35, this is the end of Antiochus Epiphanes, who's a type of the Antichrist. And when we get into verse 36, we're going to deal directly with the Antichrist. So between verse 35 and 36, Daniel, by prophecy, or nobody, sees a group of people between verse 35 and 36 called something happened. In verse 35 it says, and some of them of understanding shall fall, and try them, and to purge, and to make them white, even to the time of the end, but it is yet for that time appointed. And the king that shall do according to his will, or the willful king, and he starts to talk about, but a king will come up and do what he wants to do. So between verse 35 and 36, is the demise of Antiochus Epiphanes and the rise of the Antichrist. What happened between the end of this guy called Antiochus Epiphanes and the Antichrist? What's in between?
Jesus came, Israel didn't receive him, then the church came.
All right. Really the key is the church is in the middle here. Between verses 35 and 36 is a 2,000 year gap that Daniel doesn't write about. He just goes straight into the rise of the Antichrist, or the revised Roman Empire. He doesn't see the church. He doesn't mention the church. It's not mentioned here because it's a mystery. Paul was the first one to get a revelation of it. Nobody knew about it except God. And so in prophecy, he just prophesied straight in from Antiochus Epiphanes. You thought that was bad. He goes, let me tell you, people will try to fix it after that guy, but there's another king coming. and this other king coming is the Antichrist. So we read from verse 36 through 45. If somebody wants to read a few verses and somebody wants to take a few, we're not going to get into the detail of them today. We will deal with them next week as we go through the personality and the characteristics of the Antichrist. But let's go ahead and jump into verse 36. Maybe if you read 2 or 3 verses, and maybe somebody will take up the next 2 or 3 or whatever.
Then the king will do as he pleases, and he will exalt and magnify himself above every god, and will speak monstrous things against the God of gods. And he will prosper until the indignation is finished, for that which is decreed will be done. He will show no regard for the gods of his fathers, or for the desire of women, nor will he show regard for any other god, but he will magnify himself above them all. But instead, he will honor a God of fortresses, a God whom his fathers did not know. He will honor him with gold, silver, costly stones, and treasures. He will take the action against the strongest of the fortresses with the help of the foreign god. He will give great honor to those who acknowledge him, and will cause them to rule over the many, and will parcel out land for oppression.
At the time of the end, the king of the south will engage him in battle, and the king of the north will storm out against him with chariots and cavalry and a great fleet of ships. He will invade many countries and will sweep through them like a flood. He will also invade the beautiful land. Many countries will fall, but Edom, Moab, and the leaders of Ammon will be delivered from his hand. He will extend his power over many countries. Egypt will not escape. He will gain control of the treasuries of gold and silver and all the riches of Egypt, with the Libyans, the Cushites in submission. But reports from the east and the north will alarm him, and he will set out in a great rage to destroy and annihilate many. He will pitch his royal tents between the seas at the beautiful holy mountain. Yet he will come to his end, and no one will help him.
Okay. So if you want to summarize verses in chapter 11, verses 2 through 9 is continual wars, is really all it is. It's just all sorts of historical wars. Verses 10 through 19, Syria and Egypt, just it goes into the intricacies of the families and what goes on there, of those wars. Verses 21 through 35 is the rise of Antiochus Epiphanes and all he's going to do to Israel when he comes on the scene, and his endeavor to destroy them and annihilate them and basically stop the first advent. He's going to get defeated, and then from verse 36 to the end of the chapter is all about the Antichrist. He's going to be very similar to Antiochus Epiphanes. He's going to have the same attitude, same desire, and again, there's going to be nothing but wars. Now again, all of this, the whole purpose of chapter 10 was to show us that as these wars go on in the world in which we witness in a physical way, there's spiritual stuff going on that's behind all of it. And we're going to see all these natural wars, but behind it is all the spiritual stuff that's going on in the heavenlies. And there's an intention and a desire by Satan and his Antichrist to destroy Israel and all that it represents, and to counterfeit everything that God is, and to set up his own kingdom with his own Antichrist. And so this is Satan's desire to create his own kingdom and to undo what God is doing. And chapter 11 is a great detail of the personality of the Antichrist and his attitude. We're going to see that next week. He's going to be a political genius. He's going to be a military genius. He's going to be an economic genius. He's going to control gold and silver. I mean, this guy is going to control the economies of the world. This guy is going to have an influence over economies and over trade and over the military. He's going to be an incredible individual. And the only person that's going to stop him is the Lord Jesus Christ. When he comes to his reign, the first 3.5 years will be pretty diplomatic. He'll be winning his way into usurping his way through flatteries and promises, and everyone's going to think he's going to come up with great answers, he's going to solve problems, he's going to be known as a great peacemaker, and then all of a sudden, after the 3.5 years of his rise, he's going to walk into the Holy of Holies in Jerusalem, sit up on the throne, claim he's God, and then God says, and Jesus says in Matthew 24, unless God shortens that time, this guy is going to destroy all flesh. He's going to go after everybody. And as he does that, he's going to get trouble, because he's going to find out that there's other kingdoms now going to start rising against him, and that's when we're going to have battles from the north, south, east, and west. And he's going to win predominantly all of them until he has half of Jerusalem taken, and when he's about to finish Jerusalem off, at the end of that 3.5 year period, who do you think fixes it? Jesus. That's when the second advent comes, and that's when Jesus comes to sort him out at the Battle of Megiddo, or Armageddon, that valley that is just outside of Jerusalem, and a huge plain that runs out to the Mediterranean. It'll be filled with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of armies that'll come against Israel, and he will come and defeat them at that particular battle. So,
do you have any idea who the God of fortresses is?
yes.
Are you willing to share?
The God of fortresses that he puts his trust in is his own military might. It's his own ability. That's what I'm saying. He's going to be a military genius. He's going to put his trust. See, you've got to remember too, all his strength and all his ability doesn't come from himself. Yeah, go to Revelation chapter 13, if you would. Revelation 13. Everybody okay? This is a complicated little piece of...
No, but that was super helpful. The whole Bernice thing was really helpful.
if you go back and do it, you'll see all of that stuff, and you'll see Antiochus the first, and then Antiochus the second, and then you'll see Ptolemy the first, Ptolemy the second, Seleucus the first, Seleucus the third, and you think, oh my gosh, how many kids did these guys have? And they just, the animosity between them was terrible. But it's playing out till we get down to this one guy called Antiochus Epiphanes, and instead of it being a north-south, 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 Assyria, Egypt, this guy's different. He goes after Israel, and that's where it's different. That's when the Maccabees rise up. So when you read all the history of the Maccabees, when you go to the Catholic Bible, those 14 books called the Apocrypha, they're all the letters that were written during that period of time by this priestly family called the Maccabees, who led that rebellion. The Catholic Church included them in what we call the scriptures. So they have those additional books in their Bible. But when the Council of Nicaea and the Council of Trent were going through the authenticity of Scripture to see that it, was it accurate, did it contradict the rest of Scripture, and so on and so forth, they threw those letters out because they contradicted the rest of Scripture. So when you go to the book of the Maccabees or the Apocrypha, you'll find in there they talk about the mother of heaven, they'll talk about purgatory, and all sorts of different things. They're all in the Apocrypha. That's where all of that comes from, those books. Indulgences and all of that stuff comes out of them books. And it's contrary to salvation by faith and faith alone in Jesus Christ. And so when they were assessing these letters as to whether they were scriptural, in the fact that they were inspired by the Spirit of God, they threw them out and said, no, they're not.
Who wrote those? The Maccabees wrote?
The Maccabees, they're letters that were written during that time among themselves about what was going on. And
what region was the Maccabees from?
they were in Israel. They were Jewish, yeah. And so they wrote these letters. They fought against, militarily, they fought against Antiochus Epiphanes. They overcame him, but they didn't defeat him, but they overcame him. He died later on. But separate from that. But that's what went on. But he did try to destroy Israel. And it was after that then the Messiah came. Herod came in, and the Romans put Herod in charge to quieten that whole area down. So Herod had several sons, and they give the regions to Herod's sons. So Herod had a few kids, but Herod the Great was the one that the Romans agreed to put in charge there to quieten that whole region down. And then later on, Pontius Pilate came in at that time too to represent Rome. Herod represented the people, and so that's why you have all that political stuff going on at that time.
So those letters, they still use some of that, don't they?
The Catholic Church,
Does.
yeah. Until recently, I think the Pope of recent days closed hell. Purgatory, closed purgatory. He said the purgatory, it doesn't, obviously they closed it.
That was a little weird.
Yeah, some stuff like that, you understand. So all I'm saying is, if you're ever wondering what the extra books are in the Catholic Bible, and I was raised Catholic, those books come from this period of time, during the period of Antichrist, Epiphanies, where all those battles went on. Yes, sir.
Could you explain the importance of verse 41? And you may be going to do that next weekend. If you are, I'll wait. But the idea of rescuing Edom, Moab, and the sons of Ammon, it just kind of looks like it's kind of stuck in there, but there's got to be more to it than that.
There is. Remember I told you, see if you can remember.
Is that the mountains of Moab?
Remember when Jesus is in Matthew 24, he says, and when you see the abomination of desolation sit on the holy place and declare himself. Go to Matthew 24:15.
Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel, the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains.
What mountains?
Must be Moab.
Moab, Ammon, and Edom. That's where they go. Then if you go on in chapter 24, go on through to, you're reading from 15, read verse 24.
24. For false Christ and false prophets will arise and will show great signs and wonders, so as to mislead, if possible, even the elect. Behold, I have told you in advance. So if they say to you, behold, he is in the wilderness, do not go out, or behold, he is in the inner room, do not believe them.
Okay. He's talking to the children of Israel here. Jesus is prophesying, saying there's going to come a day when this guy sets himself up in the Holy of Holies. When that happens, get out of Jerusalem. Run as quick as you can. Don't go back in for your coat. Don't go back in for anything. And God help you if you have little babies at that time, because you're going to have to run, but you're going to have to take your babies. And for those of you that have children in suck that are just infants, it's just going to be a terrible time. Pray as well that when this guy sets himself up, that it's not in the middle of winter, because you're just going to have to run. And pray that it's not on a Sabbath day, because you will be back in under the law again, thinking I can only go certain many steps a day, and so on and so forth, because we've re-resurrected the temple and we're back to worshiping God again. Oh, how great it is to do it. We're 3.5 years into having our own temple again, obeying the laws again, and then all of a sudden this guy in front of, CNN and ABC and Fox and the whole lot's going to sit up there, make the announcement, I'm God. He says, when you hear that, you people in Israel run. And you run to the mountains of Edom, Ammon, and Moab. And he says, and later on, as we just read, there's going to be people, I don't know what way he's going to protect them. I'll show you now in a second where they're going to go. But these guys are going to come out and loud hail up into the into the mountains and say, hey, you know what? You can come on down. He's here. He's in the holy place. He said, he told us to come and get you. Come on, just come on out of there. Come on down from the mountains, Katy Daly. And he said, don't come down. Don't move. You don't know who Katy Daly is, do you? No, I knew you did. There's a song. That's just the way I think. Sorry. And there's a song, there's an old song that says, come down from the mountains, Katy Daly. No, you don't know that song. All right. It's just me. Lucy did. No, I'm not going to sing it. But anyway.
I think Richard can get you a recording.
Oh, Richard can get anything. He's one of those guys.
When it says the sons of Ammon, it doesn't say Ammon like it did Moab and Edom. It said the sons of Ammon in my version. So that just means Ammon.
Yeah, it's just the sons of Ammon. That's just your version. It says the chief of the children of Ammon. It's just basically, he's basically saying that these people are protected. This is an area, this family, this region. You can go there. If you go to Revelation chapter 12, Revelation the 12th chapter, and I did tell you to go to 13 too, didn't I?
11,
It said, let me just, if you read in chapter 12, let me go down to verse 13. Well, actually, go back to verse 12. Somebody read verses 12 through 15, if you would, firstly.
Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has gone down to you. He is filled with fury, because he knows that his time is short. When the dragon saw that he had been hurled to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child.
The woman here is Israel, all right? Read verse 13 again, please, and carry on.
When the dragon saw that he had been hurled to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child.
Who's the male child?
Jesus.
All right, keep going.
The woman was given the two things of a great eagle, 2 wings of a great eagle, so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the desert, where she would be taken care of for a time, times, and half a time, out of the serpent's reach.
What's a time, and half a time? 3.5 years. So there was a place of provision made for her when she fled from the dragon. In the wilderness, somewhere for her to go, and she would be looked after for how long? 3.5 years. So when Jesus says, get down off the rooftop, get out, don't go back for your coat, flee to the mountains, as he says in Matthew 24, what mountains is he talking about? Edom, Ammon, and Moab. And here the Bible says that it's already prepared for them. So let's read that verse 14 again and carry on, if you would, please, Marty.
The woman was given the 2 wings of a great eagle, so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the desert, where she would be taken care of for a time, times, and half a time, out of the serpent's reach. Then from his mouth the serpent spewed water like a river, to overtake the woman and sweep her away with the torrent. But the earth helped the woman by opening its mouth and swallowing the river that the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. Then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to make war against the rest of her offspring, those who obey God's commandments and hold to the testimony of Jesus.
All right.
The dragon stood on the shore of the sea.
Well, let's read that. Keep going, because I was going to go to 13.
And I saw a beast coming out of the sea. He had 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 crowns on his horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear, and a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power, and his throne and great authority. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have had a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was astonished and followed the beast. Men worshipped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast. And they also worshipped the beast and asked, "Who is like the beast? Who can make war against him?" The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies, and to exercise his authority for 42 months. He opened his mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name in his dwelling place. To those who live in heaven, he was given power to make war against the saints and to conquer them. And he was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast. All those names who have not been written in the book of life belonging to the Lamb that was slain from the creation of the world. He who has an ear, let him hear.
I'll just close it there. So, as you can see, he's going to come down, he's going to get defeated in the heavenly arenas. He's going to come down to the earth and go after Israel. And when he does, the earth is going to swallow Israel up. He's going to come after them like a flood, but the land itself will protect them from his endeavor to destroy them. And they will be protected in the mountains of Edom, Ammon, and Moab. And that's where they have to stay for the next 3.5 years. And as long as they stay there, and he can't touch them, and as a result of that, he then goes after everybody else in his fury. And anybody that is friends of Israel or is sympathetic towards Israel, he's going to go after them. So that's what verse 41 of Daniel 11 is all about.
So this here where it says, verse 13, it says, "And when the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child." So is that a time? Is that when God just kind of says it's time and kind of when it says it throws the dragon down to the earth, shuts him out because Satan can go into heaven right now?
No, Satan used to be able to go into heaven. Yeah. Now let me put it this way: if you go to the book of Job, for example, Job. Somebody just want to read. In Job chapter 1 and verse 6, as you read the narrative there, Satan shows up in heaven, and God says, "Hey, what have you been at?" He says, "I'm just going around the earth, as usual, just seeing what mischief I can get up to." He said, "I bet you saw my man Job down there when you were down there." And this discourse goes on. And many times in chapter 1 and in chapter 2, we see Satan present himself to God, as did all the other angels too. When Jesus, up until Jesus rose, Satan had access to that domain, that arena. Why do you think he had access to the throne of God?
He was an angel.
He did something
Because of what happened in the garden and the price had been paid.
what Adam had access to the presence of God. God used to come down and talk to Adam in the cool of the day. Satan, prior to this, he was called Lucifer. He was an anointed cherub. After his demise, when he led rebellion against God and was cast out of heaven, his name was called. And Jesus said, "I was there the day he was cast out. I saw him fall like lightning. I saw the day he got, kicked in the rear end and was told, 'You're out of here, pal.' But if he was thrown out, how come he got back in?" He usurped something that Adam had. Adam had the right to come into the presence of God. God used to come down and talk with Adam in the cool of the day. And so all of a sudden, for someone who was kicked out, now we see him having access right to the throne of God. So, because Adam had access to God, that was his privilege, and Satan usurped that, he regained a privilege that he had lost when he was kicked out the first time. And he had access to the throne of God because man did. So sin affected everything right up to, but not including, the throne of God. That was the only thing that wasn't contaminated. Angels were contaminated, man was contaminated, right up to the throne of God. When Jesus rose and went to heaven with the blood, he cleansed everything. He cleansed the whole thing. Everything is clean. Everything has been cleansed. And Satan does not have access to the throne of God anymore, because we have a man, a deified man, a glorified man, triumphant man, the last Adam, who fixed that problem. And he doesn't have access to God anymore. He's confined to the heavenlies that he's in. That's where he is. But
when it says thrown down to the earth,
that's when they all get involved here in the physiology of the world in which we live. And they're not so much operating up there anymore. Now they're operating down here.
that's when the proverbial all hell breaks loose.
That's when all hell breaks loose, and that's when the abyss will open up and 200 million demons will come up out of the abyss and start to inflict themselves on men, and death will be taken off the earth for 5 months. So people will try and commit suicide for a 5-month period on this planet, will not be able to do it. It won't happen. And the only people that will not suffer during that time are the ones who didn't take the mark of the beast. Everybody else will suffer. I know it sounds like what sort of a movie are you looking at? But it's really what's written there. It's an horrific time. So he is cast down. So at this moment in time, he's
in the heavenly, but he's not.
He's not in heaven. He doesn't have access to heaven.
Or in the.
It's like as I showed you before. People think, well, the devil's in hell. There's nothing in the scriptures to ever indicate that he was ever in hell, or he has a receptionist. I mean, he doesn't have a receptionist in hell, and as you arrive in hell, oh, your name, please, thank you, yes, in you go. And he's got his guys in there shoveling coal. I mean, that's such a religious... There's nothing in the scriptures to say that he has ever visited hell. There's nothing. He's never been there. Sheol, the upper and lower regions, were designed by God to hold human spirits in her until the judgment. He'll eventually end up down there, incarcerated for 1,000 years, but he's not in hell as in Sheol. He's never been.
Will he be in Sheol or Tartarus for 1,000 years?
No, he's going into the abyssus, into the abyss, where all the devils and demons are. That's where he will be locked up for 1,000 years.
But Tartarus is separate than the abyss.
Totally separate, because they did a separate thing altogether.
Okay.
What was the separate thing they did?
They violated, came out and had relations with women.
That's right. They left their first estate and their own habitation, and they went after the daughters of men. And he said, nah, that crook, I got to put you in there. You have a different...
That's the only demons who are in Tartarus is those guys.
Those fallen angels are in Tartarus. Devils and demons are in the abyssus. Yes?
Let me back up for a second, because I'm lost in this sci-fi here.
All right.
But God's throne has been cleansed because of the blood of Jesus.
Correct.
So, yet Satan is still going to be thrown down to the earth.
Uh-huh.
So, they're still in that middle range or that area that Michael had to come through in order to deliver Daniel the dream.
The scriptures talk to us about 3 heavens. Go to 2 Corinthians chapter 12.
2 Corinthians.
Uh-huh. This may, as I say, dealing with you guys is it's a different class than the average. So if you show up here on a Saturday morning, Lord knows what you're going to get into here. I'm trying to answer all your questions as best I can, or to the best of my understanding, and I don't know it all. But this is the class for us to talk about stuff that you wouldn't normally talk about on a Thursday night or to the men's group, whatever. It gives us that opportunity, that free range to bounce the ball off the wall, and wherever it lands, we'll slap it up against it again and see where we're at. So this class can be like that. So if you're thinking, where is the cohesion in what we're talking about right now? There isn't. It's just we're playing racquetball here, and if you get hit with the ball, I'm sorry, but we're slamming it around the walls here. 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Would you read verses, Doug, since you brought it up, would you read verses 1 and 2?
Boasting is necessary, though it is not profitable. But I will go on to visions and revelations of the Lord. I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago, whether in the body I do not know, or out of the body I do not know, God knows. Such a man was caught up in the third heaven.
How many heavens?
Third.
Third. So if he was caught up to the third heaven, and Paul is going to go and talk about how he was caught up and had an encounter with God, it's where Paul got all of the revelation that we have in the epistles, really, is where he got it. So he was caught up into the third heaven. That means that there's two others. All right? So what are the two others? Atmospheric heaven and the stellar heavens. Okay?
And the what?
Stellar. The galaxies and whatever, what we call, from the Big Bang Theory and all that is created, all the heavens, the heavenly bodies, which were created and are mentioned. And they're all distinct. Every single one of them is distinct. In Genesis 1, go to Genesis 1.
So the third heaven is where God resides.
The third heaven is where God resides. Yeah.
Also called paradise.
It's also called paradise, yeah. Organized garden really is all that word means. That's what Eden means. It means an organized garden.
Now, is paradise all of heaven or a subset of heaven?
No, heaven is, from what we understand of it, it's a paradise. It's
So it's not a subset, it's the whole.
no, it's a beautiful place. It's where God resides. It got contaminated because of sin. When Lucifer led the rebellion, God flung him out of there, and that was it. He was out.
Same place where the beggar was in Abraham's bosom.
No.
The beggar was looking over at the rich man and said he was in paradise.
Yes, it was referred to as paradise.
So that's a different place.
And the word there, paradise, just means a place of comfort, as opposed to a place of torment, which was across the divide. We get confused with our English words many times. Eden just means garden, really is what it is. It's also a paradise in that it's a place
So
of...
that was the paradise that was pre-Christ for the Old Testament believers.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is different than the paradise spoke of by Paul right here.
Or when Jesus said today to the thief on the cross, today you will be with me in paradise, he was talking about the heaven of paradise.
Yes. Yeah.
But Paul in verse 4 says was caught up into paradise and heard an expression of the word. So are we talking about the same paradise or a different one?
No, we are talking about...
Because that paradise is where God is.
That's where God is, yes. Yeah, no, he wasn't called into the paradise. That's empty down there. That paradise was empty when he led captivity captive. He took them out of that waiting place, or that place of, that holding place, but a place of peace. He brought them out of there and took them up to that. Our English language doesn't really do it good. Yeah, and if you go to Revelation 2 in verse 7, it brings up paradise again. Yes.
There's 7.5 million people spread around the earth.
7.5 billion.
Spread around the earth. And the scriptures here, whenever the Antichrist is bringing all these horrors down, seems to be focused on Israel and the Hebrews. So, what are the rest of the world? I'm going to be with you. But the people who are still here, what do they suffer, and what takes place with them?
The Antichrist, his endeavor is to rule the world. Remember when Jesus showed up and the devil took him to a high mountain, to a pinnacle of the temple, and showed him the kingdoms of the world and said, hey, if you just bow down and worship me, I'll give you the systems that I've set up, due to the fact that I've usurped Adam's authority because of sin. He's going to want to run the world, is what he's going to try and do. He won't. He will try. And he's going to be such a genius as far as solving problems. He'll come up with the answer maybe to the coronavirus, or come up with the answer to AIDS, or because he's awesome. The guy is just brilliant. He's going to have, he's going to be a political genius. He's going to be a financial genius. He's going to come up with solve all sorts of problems. But one of the economic things he's going to do is he's going to require that everybody takes a particular mark. That mark will allow you to barter and to do life in the systems that he will set up. If you have that mark, you can it'd be like a passport, to go hither and thither and to do your groceries and do whatever. If you don't have the mark, you will not be able to eat. It'll tell us in the book of Revelation. You just won't be able to. Not all the nations of the world are going to succumb to him. Many are going to fight against him. They're not going to like it. But he will try and set up an economic system that within it, he'll try and control it. And the only way to deal with him is through having a mark. There will be many who will resist that. They will not take it. Some of the battles, and especially the last battles, the problems with the north and whatever that he's going to have, is going to be other kingdoms that will come against him to fight him as well. So he's going to have a lot of trouble on his hands as well. There's going to be a lot of nations not take the mark of the beast. They're the ones, remember in Matthew 25, when he takes the sheep and the goats, and he says to the ones on the right hand, you know, when I was hungry, you fed me, and when I was naked, you clothed me, and when I was in prison, you visited me. And this, well, when did we do that? He says, well, when you did it unto the least of these, my brethren, the Jews, you did it to me. Enter now into the Millennial Kingdom. So we're going to have nations that are going to enter into the Millennial Kingdom that never took the mark of the beast. He will try to run the world, but he will fail. Jesus will rule the world. But again, he just tries to counterfeit everything God is and God does. Jesus is the only one that will ever run the whole world. But he will the Antichrist will try through the mark, but there'll be many nations will not take the mark of the beast. Find that nation and live in it. That's my recommendation. Yes?
And when, back to Daniel 11, when it says in those last verses, 41 on, it says that he gets distracted. You know, there's the king of the south, which is Egypt. Is the king of the north still Assyria?
It could be Syria, but it could go further on north, like many believe as you go to the book of Ezekiel, that it could be Russia.
It could be Russia. So
Yeah.
it's not necessarily, just because it's the king of the north, it's not always the same.
Not always the same king. The kings are a king from the north is going to come down south.
So
But
it's a king, not the king.
yes, it's going to be from the north. The Antichrist is also known as the Assyrian.
Yes.
Um,
Known as the Grecian.
There's many a prophecy against him. O Assyrian, the rod of mine anger and the staff of their hand is mine indignation. He's called the Assyrian. He's called many different things, but one of them is the Assyrian. And so what we're going to be able to surmise from the prophecies against him is that he's going to be Syrian, that he's going to be a Jew. The Antichrist is going to be a Jew. You know that. And the reason he's going to be a Jew, he's also called the profane and wicked prince of Israel. The Jews are going to accept this character. He's going to make peace with Israel for how long? They ain't going to just swallow and receive anybody. I'll go down to this, I'll show you that.
Wait, go back. Where was the one? What was, I missed that verse. The one that says he was the profane, wicked. Yeah, let me capture that one. Thank you.
All right. I have a whole bunch of names for this individual, and we won't have time to go through them. A lot of prophecy, but let me just go to this. We didn't get that far, gosh. Jesus said, I am come in my Father's name, and you receive me not. Who's he talking to? The Jews. He's talking to the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They're arguing with him here. And he says, hey, I came in my Father's name. He came in his Father's name. What was his representation from the Father? As he represented the Father, he represented the Father as what? Very important statement, this. He said, my Father sent me here.
Yeah.
So what did his father send him there as?
Savior.
Savior. What's another word for it?
Messiah.
The Messiah. He's God's Messiah. All right? He says, I have come here. My Father sent me here. I am come in my Father's name. You won't receive me. If another come, the word there, another, and I'll take it up next week, is the word allos, which means another of the exact same kind. Another will come. Another Messiah. And another will come. If another shall come in his own name, what does he say? You will receive him. You'll take him in. You'll think, oh, this is great. Here he is. He's awesome. He said, but you better watch out, because the day that guy sits on the Holy of Holies on the throne and says, I'm God, he says, you better get out of there quick. You better run for the mountains and hope that it's not such and such, because he will dupe you in. You will all swallow. You'll think he is the be-all and end-all. He says he'll come in his own name. I came in my Father's name and you refuse me. This guy's going to come in his own name, but he'll be another of the same kind. He's going to be another Antichrist, a Messiah. He's going to call himself, he's going to look that way, they're going to think that's who he is, and he says, you don't, but you will receive. So this guy is going to be Syrian, he's going to be a Jew, and I'll take up some of the other aspects about him next week. But there's a lot of things about him that we can tell. He won't be married, he'll be a single individual, and it may even seem that he has no love for women at all, which might mean that he has homosexual tendencies as well. We're just pulling that out of Scripture, but there are a lot of things you can tell about him.
The Muslims will accept him, correct?
No, the Muslims are not. The Muslims, if you go to the Muslim world right now, the Muslims, Muhammad was their great prophet, and they acknowledge Jesus as a great prophet, but Muhammad is a superior prophet because of he's latter from Jesus. So they acknowledge Jesus as a great prophet. They acknowledge Muhammad as a greater prophet, but they're waiting on the prophet. The prophet they're waiting on is the one that they're all going to yield to when he arrives.
And I thought that it was going to be the Antichrist.
The Antichrist, it doesn't operate on his own. The Antichrist has a
They won't
sidekick.
view the Antichrist as their Messiah.
Go to Revelation chapter 13. The Antichrist has a sidekick.
Revelation what chapter?
13. The Antichrist has a sidekick. You know what I mean by a sidekick? Like Batman and Robin. All right. Well, Batman's going to have a Robin, and the Antichrist, who gets his power directly from Satan, all right, this individual, is going to have a Robin, a false prophet. Why do you think he would have a prophet? Muslim world are waiting for a prophet. So this one guy, this Antichrist, who will be a form of Christ, depict himself as a form of Christ, will capture all of the Christian world that then is, the religious Christian world, which the Bible talks about in Revelation 17 as Babylon, the whore, which I'll get into again, which is world religion. And the prophet that the Muslim world is waiting on will show up at that time too. So this Antichrist and the false prophet will unite what would be the religious Christian world and the Muslim world together to follow the one individual. That's what chapter 13 is all about. You say, well, if he's going to be anointed by Satan, why does he need a false prophet? He doesn't need the false prophet. The Muslim world need a prophet, because that's what they're waiting on. The Christian or the religious world is waiting on Christ. The Muslim world is waiting on a prophet.
You contend that the Antichrist and the false prophet
the Bible says in Hebrews, it's appointed unto man once to die, then the judgment. They're the only two individuals on the planet that don't go through a judgment. Revelation 19, when Jesus comes back, if you want to read it again, you can. But the Antichrist and the prophet, false prophet, when Jesus comes down, those two are thrown immediately into the lake of fire. That's not Sheol, that's Gehenna, that's hellfire, that's the final judgment. So those two guys are the first two individuals into the eternal fire, and they will not have seen the books open and them being judged that way, because they're not human. They're a hybrid.